I'm Lisa. I was 27 at the time, freshly divorced, and trying to make sense of my life after everything fell apart. I'd spent the last few months tangled in legal paperwork, long arguments, and sleepless nights that left me exhausted in every way possible. It was Sarah, my best friend since high school, who insisted I needed a change of scenery, something to clear my mind. She convinced me a camping trip was just what I needed. Sarah was always the adventurous one, the kind of person who thought that fresh air and a campfire could heal anything. I wasn't so sure, but I went along with it. I guess part of me just wanted to be away from the memories of my empty apartment. The plan was simple. Find a quiet, isolated campsite and spend the weekend enjoying nature, drinking wine under the stars, and forgetting about everything that had gone wrong. We set out early on September 4th. I remember the drive vividly. We left the city, watching as the buildings gave way to endless fields, and eventually, thick stretches of forest. It was late afternoon when we finally arrived at the campsite, a spot Sarah had found online, miles away from any town or busy road. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed in on you, and the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. The campsite was at the edge of a small clearing surrounded by woods. We pitched our tent, set up our little fire pit, and opened a bottle of cheap wine. It felt good for a while to sit back and let my guard down, letting the weight of the last few months slip away. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the woods around us took on a different character. The shadows deepened, and the wind carried a chill that cut through the warmth of the fire. That's when we noticed them. Strange markings on the trees surrounding the clearing. They were painted in red, simple but unsettling, like crude clown faces. Sarah brushed it off, saying it was probably just teenagers messing around. I laughed along, but a shiver ran down my spine that I couldn't shake. That first night, after the fire had died down, we heard it. A laugh. It echoed through the trees, faint at first, almost swallowed by the wind, but it was unmistakable. High-pitched, almost playful. Sarah laughed it off, said it was probably just other campers messing around. I tried to agree, but something about it made my skin crawl. It sounded too deliberate, too close. The next morning, I stepped out of the tent, stretching the stiffness from my muscles, and that's when I saw it. A clown mask hanging from one of the tent poles. It was cheap plastic, the kind you'd find in a dollar store, but the painted grin felt mocking. Sarah came out behind me, and I could see the frown on her face. "Okay, that's weird," she admitted, trying to keep her voice light. "Probably just some jerk trying to freak us out." I wanted to believe her. We spent the day hiking, trying to put the weirdness behind us. The air was crisp and the forest was beautiful, sunlight filtering through the leaves, dappling the ground. But I couldn't shake the unease that settled in my stomach. The feeling that we were being watched, that somewhere beyond the trees, someone was waiting. That night, the laughter came again, louder this time, closer. I felt my chest tighten as I lay in the tent, staring at the nylon ceiling, listening to Sarah's even breathing beside me. In the morning, we found more. Small, clown-themed trinkets scattered around our campsite. A red balloon tied to a branch above the tent. A tiny clown doll sitting by the fire pit. A squeaky red nose lying in the grass. Sarah's face paled when she saw them, and I knew she was starting to feel it too. The sense that this wasn't just a prank. The third night, the air was thick with tension. We sat by the fire, barely talking, our eyes constantly scanning the dark woods beyond the clearing. At some point, we heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the edge of the campsite. I grabbed the flashlight, my hands shaking as I shone it into the trees. Nothing, just darkness and shadows. Sarah tried to laugh, but it came out strangled, her fear finally breaking through. "Maybe we're just imagining it," she whispered, but her eyes said otherwise. We both knew this wasn't in our heads. When we woke up the next morning, Sarah's car was covered in white handprints, smears of face paint that streaked across the windows, the hood, the handles. That was it for Sarah. She wanted to leave, to find help, but something told me we wouldn't make it far. I watched her climb into the car, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She looked at me, her eyes wide, her voice shaking as she promised to come back with help, but she never did. I spent the day waiting, the fear growing with each passing hour, the silence of the woods pressing in on me until it felt like I couldn't breathe. By nightfall, I knew something had happened. The fire crackled weakly as I sat beside it, the darkness thick around me. And then I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows. The flicker of firelight caught on bright red fabric, on a painted white face. My heart pounded in my ears as I stood, the flashlight trembling in my hand. I took a step forward, the beam catching the figure's eyes. Eyes that looked too familiar. The clown stepped closer, and I could see the outline of the mask, the cheap plastic reflecting the light. I reached out, my breath catching in my throat as I pulled the mask away. It was Sarah. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, her face smeared with white paint, her lips twisted into a grin that didn't belong to her. She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of recognition, a plea for help. But then she laughed, a hollow, broken sound that echoed through the clearing, chilling me to my core. I ran. I didn't think, I just ran, tearing through the woods, branches whipping at my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I reached the road, until I flagged down a passing car, my words spilling out in a frantic mess. They called the police, but by the time anyone came, there was nothing left. Just an empty campsite, the fire long dead, and the echoes of laughter fading into the trees. I never saw Sarah again. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it. That laugh, faint and distant, carried on the wind. A reminder of what I lost, of what I left behind in those woods. And I wonder if she's still out there, waiting, laughing, forever lost to whatever found us that weekend. Story 2. It was late October, somewhere around the 20th, and I had just started working the night shift at a 24-hour gas station off Route 12. My name is Jake, and back then I was 32, trying to patch myself together after a bad breakup. The kind where your apartment is suddenly too empty and every place you once loved feels hollow. So I picked up a night gig, hoping that some extra hours and exhaustion would stop my brain from running circles around what I couldn't change. The town I lived in wasn't anything special, suburban, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Not much happened, and the gas station I worked at was just like the rest of the town. Quiet, uneventful, and predictable. Most nights, I'd see the same few regulars. Truckers coming in to refill, teens sneaking beer with fake IDs, and a couple of old folks buying lottery tickets they hoped might change everything. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until the clown. The first time I saw him, it was a stormy night. The kind where the rain hammers down so hard that the world blurs outside the windows. Midnight rolled around, and the doorbell chimed as someone entered. I glanced up from the counter, and there he was. A man dressed as a clown. Bright red wig, white face paint, and a grin smeared so wide it almost touched his ears. He carried a single red balloon. I remember thinking it was weird, but brushed it off as some late Halloween costume. He bought a bottle of water, placed the balloon on the counter without a word, paid, and walked back out into the rain. I thought it was a one-time thing. Some weird dude on his way back from a party, maybe. But then he came back, always at midnight, always on nights when the storm howled outside. The ritual was the same. He'd buy one item, sometimes a bottle of water, other times a pack of gum, and leave a balloon on the counter. No words, just that same eerie painted smile. What's stranger is no one else ever seemed to see him. I asked Mark, my co-worker, if he'd noticed the clown on his shifts, and he just looked at me like I was losing it. A clown? Jake, are you messing with me, man? He'd said, frowning. You sure you aren't just tired? It felt ridiculous, so I stopped asking. But the balloons kept showing up. Red, bright, and tied neatly to the counter's edge. I started feeling watched. On my walks home, I'd catch glimpses of something bright red out of the corner of my eye. A flash of color near the bushes, the shimmer of a balloon behind a parked car. It was enough to make the hair on the back of my neck stand up, but every time I'd turn to look, there'd be nothing there. Just empty streets, rain-slicked and deserted. Mark wasn't much help either. He started pointing out that a few of our regulars hadn't shown up in days. At first, I didn't make the connection. But then he showed me the logbook. Each of them had last been seen on nights when the clown had come by. I felt a chill creep up my spine, but I tried to shake it off. Coincidence, I told myself. Nothing more. One night, after another unsettling visit from the clown, I noticed something different about the balloon he left behind. It had something inside it. I poked it with my finger and a folded piece of paper shifted within. Carefully, I popped the balloon, my fingers trembling. The note was simple, a scrap of lined paper with messy, almost childlike writing. It read, "You still remember her, don't you?" My heart skipped a beat. I knew exactly who it meant. Maya, my ex. The breakup was fresh, the wounds barely scabbed over, and the guilt of how things ended gnawed at me every day. I crumpled the note, threw it in the trash, and tried to convince myself that someone was playing a prank. Danielle, maybe, or some kid from town. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The next couple of days were a blur of restless sleep and growing paranoia. I told my closest friend Tom about the clown. He listened, eyes narrowing as I spoke. Tom had always been the one who believed me when no one else did. He promised to swing by during my shift, just to see if he could catch a glimpse of this midnight visitor. That night, Tom came by around 11:30. He stayed for a while, keeping me company as the storm raged outside. Midnight came and went, but there was no sign of the clown. Tom eventually left, telling me to call if anything happened. I watched his taillights disappear into the rain, feeling a strange sense of unease settle over me. The clown didn't come that night, but Tom never made it home. The next day, his girlfriend called me, her voice cracking with fear. She said he'd never come back, and his phone was off. Panic clawed at my insides. I just knew it had something to do with that damn clown. I went through the next shift in a daze, my eyes darting to the door every few minutes, my heart leaping at every sound. When the clown finally showed up again, it was almost a relief. Midnight. The doorbell chimed, and there he was, drenched from the rain, balloon in hand. My fear turned into something else. Anger, desperation. I slammed my hands on the counter, my voice cracking as I shouted, "What did you do to Tom?" The clown just smiled, his eyes locking onto mine. He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "You know the answer, Jake. You've always known." He placed the balloon on the counter, then turned and walked out, disappearing into the storm. My hands were trembling as I grabbed the balloon, popping it with a pen. Another note fluttered out. It was a photo this time, a grainy black and white image of me, standing behind the counter, my face twisted in confusion. And behind me, over my shoulder, was the clown. His face was mine, distorted, twisted into that same wide, unnatural grin. I stared at the photo, my breath catching in my throat. It was me. The clown was me. A warped version, a reflection of everything I hated about myself. The guilt, the regret, the anger. I realized then that I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't ignore it. The clown wasn't real, at least not in the way I'd thought. He was a part of me, the part that had destroyed everything good in my life. I quit the gas station the next day, moved away, left everything behind, trying to start fresh. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I still see him. A flicker of red in the corner of my eye, a shadow in the window. A reminder that you can never truly escape yourself. Story 3. I was 32, just trying to get through the usual Thursday morning, juggling grading assignments and preparing lessons. When I reached my front porch that day, October 10th, 2019, the old creaky steps groaned beneath my feet, like they always did. I remember glancing down at the mailbox, just expecting bills and junk mail. But there, among the usual envelopes, was something different. It was a thick, cream-colored invitation, handwritten in an elegant but old-fashioned style. It read, "You're invited to a birthday party, Saturday, October 12th, 2019, 4 p.m. Location, 325 Hawthorne Street, Grove Hollow from your friend, the clown." The words, "Your friend the clown," made my skin prickle. I almost laughed out loud at the absurdity. I mean, a clown? What kind of grown man gets a birthday invite from a clown? But there was something unsettling about it. The address didn't ring any bells, even though I'd lived in this part of Ohio for years. I was certain I didn't know any kids in the area, let alone one having a birthday party with a clown. I took the invitation to work, where my friend Danielle, the nosy coworker everyone has, immediately took an interest. Danielle had this knack for turning anything remotely strange into a full-blown event. She snatched the invitation out of my hand and studied it like she was Sherlock Holmes. "You gotta go," she said, grinning. "It's probably some prank. Who knows, maybe someone from here at school is messing with you." "Or," I replied, rolling my eyes, "maybe it's an elaborate plot to lure me into the middle of nowhere and murder me." Danielle laughed. "Please, nothing exciting ever happens here. Besides, you're a teacher, not exactly target number 1 for psycho clowns." I should have just thrown the invitation away, but something about it, maybe Danielle's teasing, maybe my own curiosity, made me hold on to it. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, sleep coming in fits and starts. It wasn't a new feeling. Nightmares had been a part of my nights for years. They almost always involved clowns, an unfortunate side effect of a birthday party gone wrong when I was a kid. I remember it so clearly, my brother Aaron's 8th birthday. Our parents had hired a clown named Mr. Giggles, who showed up with balloon animals and face paint. At first, Aaron was thrilled, but something shifted. Halfway through, he burst into tears, screaming at the clown to leave. After that, he developed this deep fear of clowns, and I never really understood why. The image of Aaron's terrified face haunted me sometimes, especially on those nights when the nightmares came back. The ones where I'd see a clown's face looming over me, always too close. The grin too wide. October 12th came quickly. I'd almost convinced myself to forget about the whole thing, but Danielle wouldn't let it go. She practically shoved me out of the teacher's lounge that afternoon, shouting, "Text me when you find out who did it," as I walked out. It was a gloomy day, the kind where the clouds hung low and everything felt heavy. I drove to Grove Hollow, each turn taking me deeper into a part of town I didn't recognize. The houses became fewer and farther between until I found myself on Hawthorne Street. A dead end with only a few houses, most of them looking abandoned. The address, 325, was a house at the very end. It was dilapidated, with chipped paint and tacky, sagging decorations that looked like they'd been pulled out of an attic after decades. Cassie, my neighbor, had seen me leave earlier. I remembered the way she'd eyed the invitation when I showed her, her face pale and lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't said anything except, "Be careful." I'd brushed it off, but now, standing in front of that house, her words echoed in my head. I parked my car, the engine ticking as it cooled in the stillness. There were no other cars, no sounds of kids playing, no balloons or streamers. It didn't look like a party was happening. I hesitated at the foot of the walkway, glancing around, but there was no sign of life anywhere. just the cold wind rattling the bare branches of the trees overhead. I walked up to the door, my fingers brushing against the rough wood. I knocked, the sound echoing in the empty space around me. No answer. I tried the handle. It turned easily, and the door creaked open. Inside, it was dark, the only light coming from a room further down the hall. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under my weight. My breath caught in my throat as I moved forward, each step feeling like it took an eternity. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something else. Something metallic, like rust. I reached the doorway to the lit room and peered inside. My heart dropped. The walls were covered in photos. Hundreds of them. Each one was of me. There I was, at different stages of my life, as a kid at summer camp, in high school with my friends, at college graduation. And in each one, there was a clown, sometimes in the background, sometimes right beside me, always with that same painted grin. The same clown, who never seemed to age. My knees went weak and I stumbled back, my eyes darting around the room. Then I saw it. One last photo, tacked to the wall with a rusty nail. It was me, standing right here in this house, looking through the window, the reflection of the clown just over my shoulder. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest, but the room was empty. Just silence, thick and oppressive. I ran. I didn't think. I just bolted out of that house, down the walkway and into my car. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, the engine roaring to life as I peeled away, tires skidding on the gravel. I didn't stop until I was back home, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Cassie was outside when I got back. She took one look at me and knew. She didn't ask questions, just guided me inside, her hand firm on my shoulder. I never told Danielle what I found. I never spoke about it to anyone. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that clown, about the photos, about how he was always there, lurking in the background of my life.